With that, we will go ahead and get started. As everybody knows, I'm Charlie Nielsen, the seemingly perpetual president of the University Lowbrows. And once again, we are coming to you via Zoom. And I actually have to correct myself. I think last meeting I bragged that we actually had not missed a meeting at all, despite the shutdown. But then later I realized we did miss the March meeting. But then in April, we pulled together the Zoom format and have gone on ever since. So tonight, our normally scheduled speaker, Elena Gallo, had to travel to Italy for, we understand, maybe a family illness, perhaps. So this is why we had lost contact with her. And we certainly understand the situation. So knowing that we were not going to have a guest speaker, in fact, even before I was sure of it, I put out a call. And just to demonstrate how the lowbrows really are, we had not one, but 3 different people that said they could fill in a pinch. It turns out Awni was actually the first one to mention something. And so he really jammed to put this together. And that's what we told him, if you can, don't kill yourself. Because we do have other options, but since you did come first, then we'll go ahead and do it. And he did pull it together, and indeed is our guest speaker. So with that, Awni, as you all know, is a lowbrow for, I don't know, it's been 4 or 5 years, something like that, Awni? I know it goes fast.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. As we all know, he's not only an astrophotographer, but a very skilled astrophotographer. He got his bachelor's degree in computer engineering and then got himself in astrophotography. And since 2015, he's been sharing that with his family and friends, showing them the unseen beauty of deep space objects. And even today, he is still fascinated with the majesty and challenge of this hobby. So with that, you have the floor, Awni.
Thanks. So as everyone know me, I'm into astrophotography. I just love it. I love the challenge about it. I love the all the wonders that you can discover, and it just keeps me busy, keeps my brain cells active. And just let me share my screen. Oh wait, there you go. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. So you can always follow my work on Facebook and Instagram. I share more pictures about my equipment and about my experience, about all the stuff that I learn. I try to keep it on social media, just in case if I have the same problem, I can go back there and learn from it, and as well as teach other people how to do it. It's a challenging hobby. The whole idea of this presentation is, let me put it this way. When I first started the hobby, most of the people that I met, everyone says, oh, you need a telescope, you need a dedicated astrophotography camera, you need this, you need that, you need tons of money. Later on, I learned that no, most people who are interested in this hobby can do with just basic camera and a basic lens and just minimum amount of equipment. Won't have to break their bank, and the results are mind-blowing. So I'll be talking about the equipment. I'll be talking about what you need to do, some common sense, I'll go through the like an advanced equipment list in case if you love astrophotography, in case if you want to go to the next level. I'll share with you some I'll share with you the image, you know, like how to capture images, what you need to do, and what settings you need to capture your images with. I'll also include some techniques that actually high-end astrophotographers, you know, like with high-end telescopes and high-end astrophotography camera use to capture their images. It's the same process that you can apply it with a DSLR and a lens. Later on, I'll show you. So I'll talk briefly about image processing, basically just because every person has a different taste. But I will show some of very useful information and links that whoever wants to get in himself or herself into image processing, they can go to those links and learn a lot of information from it. But first, love to show you what a DSLR astrophotography can do. Some of the, so there are mainly 4 or 5 types: time-lapse, star trail, you can Milky Way and Milky Way panoramic, and the last thing, which is more like a deep imaging. You know, you basically pick a subject and an object, and you stay all night imaging just one object. So it's a different technique that, again, high-end telescopes do it. High-end astrophotography people do it. So time lapse, for example, is, you know, this is from my backyard. It's just 30-second images put together from sunset till sunrise, and you just play it in high frame rate. And I mean, it's simple. It doesn't need any what do you call it? Image processing, I would say. Whatever you get from the camera, you can put it in a video, and then you get a time lapse. With this image, I used a Canon 6D. Actually, I'll show it to you later. I used the Canon 6D with 14mm lens and 30-second exposure. Again, put it all together in a movie. The other thing you can do are star trail. It's the same images that you use to create time lapse. You can put them all together, for example, in Photoshop, and make all the layers, all the images in those series visible. So technically, what you're doing is the foreground is fixed, but the Earth is rotating. So you'll see some star trail effect, which is especially if you point to the north, you'll see everything rotate around Polaris, which is just mesmerizing. The other thing you can do is just Milky Way shots. Just find a nice foreground and capture the Milky Way. You will need fast lens. You will need, sometimes you'll need some tracker, sometimes you don't. Again, depends on how big your lens is and how fast it is. In this image, I was lucky to capture 3 comets, and that was just 25-second exposure with the highest ISO that my camera can get. Now, if people, some might ask me why the foreground is lidded. Well, in those 25 seconds, I actually open up my flashlight and just, you know, hit all the tree lines so it looks like, you know, illuminated. The other thing you can do is panoramic. So this was the first time that I've done, I mean, I would say second time that I've done Milky Way shots. All I did is I captured small bits and pieces of the sky. And technically I captured 51 frames. So it's first row, second row, and third row. And funny thing is, my image field of view is only this much. So by the end, by the time I got to the left side, there were some fishermen with bonfire. And again, because my field of view is small, I was like getting all this halo, and I'm like, oh my God, this is all because of their bonfire. I think it's like their light, they're polluting the light around them. Well, guess what? When I went back home and stitched everything together, again, I used Photoshop. I was I was blown away that I actually captured the aurora. So that's another thing you can do with just DSLR and just 25-second exposure. That was just 20-second actually. So, I mean, the whole thing didn't take less than an hour. So, you know, the other thing, like I said, constellation, you can, but now with this part of imaging, you will need a tracker. Like, and you will need proper astrophotography session or technique, I would say. The reason B is for this, for example, this one is actually a mosaic image. It technically looked like that. So I captured this part, then I moved and captured that part and that part. But I mean, it's noisy, it's dirty. But if you use the proper technique, you can clean it up and then you can stitch it together to look like that. And again, that was just done with a DSLR, a modified DSLR, and a 135 millimeter lens. So nothing fancy except for the tracker. So going into astrophotography, basically, you have to have some common sense. I mean, you can't just drive to a place in the middle of nowhere without any planning. Make sure you have a partner. Make sure you have backup phone or charger or even some sort of connection. If it's winter, make sure you bring lots of warm clothes. If it's summer, make sure you have some sort of, you know, protection from the mosquitoes. Get some food, get some drinks. Headlights, don't get, I mean, especially with star parties, don't get a red light. It's very crucial. People would hate you if you bring a white light. First aid, again, if you are like me, you got mosquito allergy, get something to protect yourself. Long story short, pre-planning. I call it 6 P's. Pre-planning prevents poor performance. Always make sure you are planning your trip before you do so. It's like a camping trip, but you're doing astrophotography instead. There are so many things you can download on your phone to plan your image session. You can use Sky Safari, Stellarium, moon faces. Basically, for example, if you're planning to image the Milky Way core, make sure what time you get there. I've done it. I mean, when I first started, I didn't know what I'm looking for. I just get there and hope for the best. No, you can do better. You can predict your imaging session. For example, if the Milky Way core rises at certain time and then peaks at that time, you can get there just before it and start imaging. It's always good to, again, it's always good to plan your image. The other thing is, when you get to a dark park, you know, something that people tell you, hey, go to Hudson or go to whatever the name of the park is. Again, plan your image. If you're planning to shoot the Milky Way, for example, and if there's a bright city towards the south, that the whole trip is a waste of time. You can't get anything because of that city's light pollution. There's so many things. I mean, for example, darksitefinder.com will tell you exactly where that park is and if there is any light pollution source around it. Lately, there is this astrospheric software. It tells you if there is a moon, if there is any, if there are going to be any clouds, or if the seeing is going to be bad. Again, predict your plan your trip. You don't want to get there again. I've had it before. I go there and just hope for the best, only because, for example, in Ann Arbor, it was clear. It doesn't work like that. If you're planning to take like a 2-hour trip, especially in Michigan, a 2-hour trip, it might be clear in Ann Arbor, for example, but whatever you're driving to, it's cloudy. So plan your trip. Now going back to the equipment that you have to have. Any camera, any DSLR with manual settings will do. Technically, you can whatever camera that can control the ISO, exposure, and aperture is good to go with astrophotography. Lenses, any fast optic lens. When I mean fast optic lens is you can set your f-stop to 2.8 and below, or even f4. That's a fast lens. You can use that with astrophotography. Remote shutter or intervalometer. Technically, you can control your camera without touching it. You will need that with astrophotography. You don't need to shake your camera while taking your images. That's another checklist you have to have. Tripod. You need to fix your camera. You need to fix, when the camera is taking images, you need your camera to be still. And that's what the tripod does. There is a rule with tripod though, is you can, like exposure wise, there is a 500 rule when using a tripod, which I'll explain it later. Make sure you got some battery or external power source, because I mean, obviously if you're gonna capture images all night, the built-in battery will die. So you need extra batteries. Make sure you got your storage. I can't insist how many times I got there and I basically forgot my SD card in the computer and we're like, oh my God, what should I do now? That's another checklist you have to check. Dew heater is one thing that most people neglect. Long story short, if you don't have anything to heat up your lens, it will fog up by the middle of the, like at midnight, for example. You don't want that. I've had it before. It's perfectly clear sky. Everything is perfect. I start capturing images and then all of a sudden my images doesn't look good. There's nothing wrong with the sky. There's no clouds, nothing. Well, guess what? There's some fog on the lens. You can eliminate that with a dew heater. Filters are optional. I mean, depends on where you're going to shoot from. If there is always a light pollution filter that help you getting better images. Focus. You can't imagine how many times before I learned about focus mask, you go there, you switch on your live view and you point to a bright star and you think you're focused, and then you start capturing your images. By the time you get back home, you open your images in the computer and guess what? All the stars are out of focus. Get a focus mask if you can. Now, from now on, star tracker, guide scope, or a laptop is optional. It's if you like this type of photography, you can invest into a tracker. Technically, will give you more exposure. You're not controlled. You're not limited by the 500 rule, which again, I'll explain it later. Guide scope will make your guiding even more accurate. Again, with the guide scope, if you're planning to use guide scope, you will need a laptop. So these are just basic checklists if you like to do astrophotography with the DSLR. Camera or the DSLR, they're two different cameras. There's the stock DSLR, which is, again, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're planning to do imaging if you're planning to image nebulas are made of hydrogen alpha emission. Most of DSLRs are not that sensitive to that emission. When I mean hydrogen alpha is this part. It's the nebula around all astrophotography, astro objects. Regular cameras won't detect that. I mean, it will, but not as sensitive as a modified camera. And again, it's if you get into if you get into astrophotography, it's always nice to have your camera modified. And when you mean modified, it's not like they're gonna replace the whole camera with a different camera. All they're gonna do is they're gonna remove either all the filters in front of the sensor, which makes it a full spectrum camera, or they're gonna remove only the LPF2 filter, which gonna make it a hydrogen alpha modification. Simple as that. 500 rule, in case if you're planning to use a tripod, is how much exposure you can get. It's the maximum exposure that you can get without having a star trail, without having your stars trailing through the sensor or through the image. Basic equation is 500 divided by the focal length of your lens and the crop factor. For example, most APS-C, most Canon cameras or Nikon are APS-C sensor, meaning it's not a full frame, it's just smaller than a full frame. The crop factor for that is 1.6. And if you're using, for example, a 40mm lens, maximum exposure is 22 seconds. Anything more than 22 seconds, when you get back home, you'll see your stars are not pinpoint. They're like stretched. Again, depends on what you're planning to do. If you're planning to do star trail, it doesn't matter. But if you're planning to do time lapse, it does. I mean, it's always good to have that pinpoint stars. This is just a diagram of different sensor size, APS-C versus full frame, and the focal length of your lens and how much exposure you can get without having the star trail. It's just something that you can plan your image and depending on what camera and lens you have. Filters, again, depends on where you're imaging from. If you're imaging from a light polluted area or close to the city, always good to have a light pollution filter. Technically what it does is it blocks the emission that comes from the light, that light pollution. I think it's just the sulfur or forgot the, anyway, let me show it this way. It's the middle part that the light pollution filter will block. So all you're gonna get is the good data, and it's gonna block all the light pollution from the city. So your image is gonna look better. Again, it's optional. I've got good images without any filter. Again, going back to focus, try to invest in a focus mask, or what they call a Bahtinov mask. The main reason for the Bahtinov mask, I mean, again, the main reason for the Bahtinov mask is to get pinpoint stars. And it's super easy. All you have to do is get something like that fits in front of your telescope or lens. And when you point to a bright star, all you have to do is just put that spike right in the middle. And that's it. You got that peace of mind that your stars are gonna look focused all night. It's a lifesaver, if I would say. Now again, tracker is a next level astrophotography. If you're not liking your images that you're capturing with using the 500 rule, meaning if you want more exposure, your object or the Milky Way doesn't look bright enough, you need like 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes, get a tracker. Basically, what the tracker does is it it makes the stars fixed on your sensor. It counter rotate the Earth rotation, and it makes it, 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 it makes more exposure much easier, I would say. I mean, I don't want to go technical. I don't think I have enough time. Examples of tracker. You got this, you got that. I mean, there's so many brands. My choice is this one. This is my actual setup when I went with the tracker setup. That's an EQ mount. This is fixed. This is aligned with the Earth axis. So, and it rotates counterclockwise, technically, against the Earth rotation. On top of it, there is a camera, there's a guide scope, and the whole thing is connected to a computer. Here's a mini PC and the whole thing is powered by a battery. This is a complete part. Oh, by the way, this is a dew heater. You see that element in front of the lens? That's a dew heater. So that's more like a beginning astrophotography setup that you can put together and get some amazing images. Like the Orion Nebula that you saw in the beginning. I got that with this setup. Yeah, I won't go
quickly, Awni, what software on your computer do you use to control your DSLR and guide scope?
Well, you don't, again, if you don't have to go all the way to, you can do it with an intervalometer. You can do it with a shuttle controller. But if you're planning to go with a computer aid astrophotography, the software that I'm using is Sequence Generator Pro. For the guiding, I'm using a software called PhD2. And they're mainly those two softwares. Is all you need is to control your astrophotography gear. Hope that answers the question.
Okay.
Auto guider, simple as that. If some mounts are perfect, you don't need guiding. I mean, if your exposure is 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, that's good enough. But if you're planning to do longer exposure, it's always good to have an auto guider. The whole point of the auto guider is the auto guider setup sensor, I would say, or the auto guider camera locks to a star in its field of view. And if that star shifts, it tells the mount to either slow down or speed up, so that your main camera will have that star dead center during the whole imaging session. So you don't have any drift, you don't have any, bad frames, I would say, that you're gonna throw later on when you stack the images. That's my setup over here. That's my Canon 6D. That's a 135 millimeter Rokinon lens. It's a manual lens, manual focus lens. You can open it all the way to f2, and that's my guide scope. It's just a small telescope with a camera, and whatever that camera sees, the star in that field of view, it technically controls the mount and tells it to either speed up or slow down. So these are just the basic equipment that you need. Again, you don't need a tracker or computer or a guide scope if you're only doing, if your interest is in time lapse or in star trail or in, capturing one frame of the Milky Way or a time lapse of the Milky Way. You don't need a tracker. But if you're planning to do longer exposure, tracker is always a necessity. It's always a good thing to have. Now, this part is basically the camera settings, and the technique So light frame, bias, dark, and flats are technique used by astrophotographers, dedicated astrophotographers with high-end telescopes. It's the same technique they use to get a final image that is cleaned up, that is, you know, ready for image processing. So with, again, if for time lapse, for star trails, these are the basic settings that you need. You will need to set your camera to manual focus. You need ISO 800 and above. You need to set your exposure. You need to set manual exposure using either bulk mode. I mean, yeah, you need to use bulk mode. Again, with the 500 rule, you're controlled by that. Your exposure is controlled by that. If you have a tracker, piece of cake, you can do 30-second exposure all the way to 5 minutes. Lens, it's always to have a fast lens. Set your f-stop or aperture to f2, between f2 and f4. Whatever the lens capability is, you know, if sometimes you set your f-stop to f2 and your stars at the corner are not pinpoint, they're stretched. Just simply stop it down, and it will the stars on the corner will be sharp. Disable your noise reduction. Don't use the built-in noise reduction. Sometimes that will ruin your stars in the image. And always capture raw files. That's very important. Don't do JPEG. That's just, you're ruining your images. For example, with the JPEG compression, you're ruining your images. Always get a raw files. Now, light frames, long story short, whatever you're gonna capture of the galaxy, of the sky, stars are called light frames. In case if you're planning to do some enhanced or deep astrophotography, you will need to stack those images together to get more data, to basically to enhance the signal to noise ratio. For example, this is one of my images that I captured of the Rojo of Yochi. This is just one frame, one image out of, I think it was 39 frames. And it's a 2-minute exposure with a tracker. It's the same setup that you guys just saw previously. My camera settings was ISO 1600. My lens was stopped to 2.3. And I got 2-minute exposure, and the temperature at that time was 65 Fahrenheit. So there's not much in there. I'm like, if a regular person see this, I'm like, I don't see anything, it's just stars. But you'll be wrong. There's so much data in this image. What you need to do is clean all this noise. And the noise comes in 3 parts. It comes as a bias frame, as a dark frame, and as a flat frame. Bias frames, long story short, is it's the census readout pattern. It looks like that. If you, the way to capture bias frames is just put the lens cap on, capture a fast exposure, the fastest your camera can do. And same ISO, same sensitivity ISO as your light frame. And doesn't matter the temperature, but you know, always gets 40 images and above. And when you stack all the images, you'll get this. This is technically your readout pattern of each camera has a different readout pattern. And that's just noise. Dark frames, with long exposure comes heat. The sensor will heat up. With heat comes thermal noise, comes dead pixels, comes amp glow. They're all different type of noise. And for example, the same image that I showed you in the beginning, the dark frame, it looks like that. This is just noise, you know, thermal noise and some dead pixels. The way to capture darks is, again, ISO has to be the same as the light frames. Your exposure needs to be the same as the light frame. Always try to get the light, your darks at the same temperature as your lights, your light frames. So it's always good to capture your darks at the end of the imaging session. Basically, if you image your subject from 10 to 12 a.m., capture your darks from 12 to 2 a.m. If you can't do that, do what I did before, you know, in the beginning when I first did astrophotography. I took the camera and put it in the fridge and captured my darks in there, because just to match the temperature of the of that night. It was funny. It was, you know, something that funny to do. Always capture 40 frames and above, and when you stack it, technically gonna look like that. That's stretched, by the way. It will, I mean, those who know what bias, darks, and flat frame, they will say, wait, doesn't look like that. Correct, it looks black, but when you stretch that darkness, it will look like that. Flat frames are basically the uneven illumination of your optics. And for example, if your optics, or technically your lens, if your lens had a dust particle on it, it will look like a donut at the in the final image. If your lens is a fast lens, you'll get some uneven field of view. So again, if you capture 40 frames of the flat frame and stack it together, it looks like that. And if there's a dust particle in the middle or on your lens or on your sensor or anywhere, it's gonna look like a donut in the middle. Again, that's another type of noise that you want to clean your light frames from. And the easiest way to capture your flat frames, which is this part, this image, is just put a t-shirt, white t-shirt in front of your lens, and you know, I mean, you can capture it in the middle of the day. You can capture it just before sunset or just after sunrise. It's really up to you. All you need is just to illuminate that t-shirt, and you'll get this. Now, you'll ask, why do we need that? Why do we need all these three, you know, like the bias, darks, and flat frames? What's the difference? The difference is that this is my original image that I showed you in the beginning. Once you apply all those frames, which are technically just noise, this frame will look like that. Look how much data are there. The stars came up, all the nebulas came up, even the dark nebula came up. Now, you can do all that with, there's so many softwares that you can do stacking, or I mean, you can do, yeah, calibration and stacking. But I mean, they're Photoshop, they're PixInsight, they're DSS, which is Deep Sky Stacker. Most people like Deep Sky Stacker basically because it's free and it does a great job. You can calibrate and stack your light frames, dark and bias and flats with this software. Again, I mean, this is just one image, one frame. Now, the reason we do stacking is to enhance this signal to noise ratio. Now, again, this is zoomed in. This is just this part zoomed in. See how many noise is there? I mean, the data is there and the noise is there as well. But when you stack, you're basically evening out your noise and you're enhancing your signal. And after stacking 39 frames, of course, you have to calibrate them, you know, like remove all the noise that we talked about previously. And when you stack all 39 frames, it looks like that. I mean, image talks of the image is just, I mean, you see the difference between a stack image and a single frame. Now, later on, all you have to do is just image processing. Most people will see this and will look at this image and like, that looks perfect. I don't have to do anything. Again, it's personal. It's personal. It's a personal thing. Image processing is a personal thing. But my version of image processing of this frame is that. Just mesmerizing. And when you show this to people, like, it's just, you know, how, where, when, you mean, is this true? It is, it is. I mean, you just need basic technique to get all the data out. Image processing, again, I'm gonna talk about it briefly. There are so many softwares that do image processing. There are so many techniques, there's so many actions. There's Photoshop. You don't have to be expert. There are so for example, there are actions within Photoshop that does all the image processing for you. All you have to do is just click one icon, and that icon will take your image, process it, and give you a result. Lightroom, if you're into Star Trail, if you're into time lapse, Lightroom and Photoshop can do a great job. If you're planning to do a video of your time lapse, recently I've used PIP. PIP is I mean, it's used for planets, but you can create a video using through it, and it's free. I mean, there's nothing wrong with free. For those who are interested in astrophotography with DSLR, go to Lonely Spec. This guy is a genius. I mean, it's like an encyclopedia of what he does, and it's like an encyclopedia that people can learn from. And he got so many examples. He got so many videos that teaches people how to get a beautiful image at the end. PixInsight is just another imaging processing software. It's not free, but in my opinion, it's worth every penny. And this link is just tutorials that tell you what to do, you know, what you can do with that software. Last but not least, basic image processing goes like that. All you have to do is just stretch the image stretch the histogram of your image, do some noise reduction, play with curves to enhance your signal to noise ratio. You can reduce the star size, sharpening images, color calibration and saturation to bring up some of the colors, and technically that's it. That's basically what most people do to enhance your image, you know, your astrophotography image. With that said, I included all the resources that will, you know, get you guys going if you're interested in astrophotography using a DSLR. And these are some of my images that I'm proud of using a DSLR, and some of them with tracker, some of them were not, with just a tripod. And that's the whole Milky Way. I mean, the Milky Way core. It's the same technique that I use with Orion. It's a 3-panel mosaic. I applied the technique that I explained, you know, the bias, the flats, the darks, to clean every frame, every frame of those 3 panels, and then stitch them together with PixInsight. You can do it with Photoshop as well. And what I mean, and I used a modified camera, and the way you can recognize is you got the nebula are so prominent. The red is so prominent. You can't get that with a regular DSLR. It has to be modified. Give me a second. The other thing you can do is just regular time lapse. That's a time lapse of the 2019 eclipse with John, God bless his soul, at his dark part, as his parking lot, and that was just with the DSLR. I think it was a 300 mil zoom lens, and I just captured images using AV mode, so the camera knows the exposure, and just basically just put it together in a movie. This is another image. Oops. Give it a second. This is another image of the Milky Way with 35 millimeter lens and what do you call it? And with a macro third camera. Same technique. I've used the same technique to clean up each panel and then stitch it together. Let's see if the other one works. There you go. This was another example with the DSLR, and I think it was a 24 millimeter lens. I was planning to capture aurora here, but clouds rolled in, so I just adapted my technique, captured, I think it was a 2-second exposure, and when I got back home, the moon was out, and also all the clouds is illuminated, and if you see at the end of the video, there's some thunders over there. Thunderstorm over there. So that's again, you don't have to do any flats or darks or bias in this one. You just go back home, do some minor processing, you know, in case if you need to, and then put everything together in a movie and run that as a, you know, you can either run it as a 24 frame per second or 50 frame per second, whatever. I think my image, oops. Yeah, my image, the software that shows the images kind of stopped working. But you guys saw that. This is a panoramic of the whole Milky Way. This is the Orion Nebula. Again, with 6D camera, which is a modified camera, and 3 panels, and followed the same technique, bias, darks, and flats to clean each one and then stitch it together. Come on, seriously. Give me a second. Oh, there you go. That's a one of my hunting trips for aurora. This is 8-second exposure at ISO, I think 3200, and technically captured the whole thing all night. Went back home, did some minor image processing to bring up more data, you know, like all the reddish and the bluish, you know, enhance that, and then put everything together in a movie. And just mesmerizing. In case if you guys asked, this was captured from Rogers City in Michigan. And, you know, I guess I was just lucky. Last and not least, this is another aurora time lapse. Hope you like it. And after that, come on. There you go. this was just one night activity. All the videos were cropped and put together with a montage with some music, and I hope you guys love it.
That was excellent.
Oops. With that said, any questions, please?
I hope you answered mine earlier.
Avni, this is Krishna. I don't know if we're doing orders or anything for questions, but it looks like a lot of the shots that you took and a lot of what you talked about was sort of the wide angle astrophotography where you're taking it straight from your SLR. I assume you also hook your telescope up to your camera up to your telescope from time to time.
Definitely.
And that I'm just curious how that works. I tried this, you know, over 10 years ago and got quickly frustrated because I was kind of trying to figure it out on my own.
The same.
And it's like, you know, how do you attach it to the scope? How do you know if you're in focus or not? And then do you do it with the, like you put it where the eyepiece would go, but then you would keep the eyepiece in order to get that, you know, that nebula in focus? Just some of those like technical details.
It's very challenging. It can be very frustrating, and it's a learning curve. But let me put it this way. Once you figure out all the mechanical issues, meaning, you know, focal, you know, back focus and focal length and focus, you know, like focus mask, and you get a decent image. The technique that I just explained can be used exactly with a telescope. And once you clean everything up and you stack all the images using the softwares that I provided in the presentation, you'll be amazed with the final image. Ask Adrian. I mean, he tried some of the, he knows this technique, and every time he get an image and stack it together, he's just, wow. But I agree with you. Getting everything hooked up and working, and you get, until you get pinpoint focus stars, I prefer to do that in my backyard before I go to any dark park, so that at least when I get there, I have the peace of mind. I have the knowledge, enough knowledge of my equipment, how to troubleshoot it in the middle of nowhere at dark.
Yeah,
I think that would be
I can
another whole
speak for
presentation.
the difference that I'm seeing in my images. Yeah, it would. The differences in the images, I can speak for myself, and I can actually speak for Jeff Kopmanis, who I've seen some of his work start to turn around. Yeah, you. Your M16 looks, to me, your M16 turned a corner. And it took time. It takes time, frustration, and just, you know, you keep going at it until suddenly things start to make sense, and you start to see images get better. Your single frames than your old images. It's something you're constantly learning too. So
all I'm trying
stop.
to say is, because I've seen it many times, especially at the park, at Hudson Park, when I used to go there. I used to bring my big telescope, and everyone would say like, oh, that's too much money. That's too much equipment. That's too complicated. It's not. It's just next level. But you don't have to be there. You don't have to get such equipment to get into astrophotography. You can get simple equipment. It's not like cheap equipment, but basic DSLR, basic lens. Just get that technique solid, and you'll be amazed with the amount of data, or you'll be amazed with the pictures that you can get as a result.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. The first setup I had was with my Nexstar 8 SE, and a $100 camera, and I was getting great shots of the moon and all that, and it was cheap, and it was a way to get started and get your feet wet. We do have a question from Doug Warshaw on the chat session. It says, for telephoto lenses, do you recommend zoom lenses or dedicated lenses? And if the latter, what does what focal length would recommend for a first lens? And how hard is it to remove or replace filters for DSLR? It scrolled on me.
Okay, so,
Yeah,
first thing first, zoom lens, I always prefer a prime lens. It doesn't mean like zoom lens won't work, but the stars at the edge with the prime lens is always better. Again, the whole point is aperture. Get a lens with a fast aperture. You know, f2.8. That's perfect. Doesn't, you know, you'll capture enough light to get the image that you want without using a tracker, for example. I mean, you can definitely get enough data with just 20-second exposure, and that gets you, you know, you don't need a tracker to get images, to capture those images if you have a fast lens. Filters depends on the camera, to be honest. Most
I have a Canon Rebel T3i.
perfect.
Okay.
You know, if you Google Canon T3i or even 2Ti astrophotography images, you'll be blown away with all the details. I mean, my first camera was 100D. I think it forgot the brand, but it's the smallest type, the smallest model of Canon. And I mean, I captured rosette. I mean, that rosette, I can bring it over. I captured this rosette.
Oh, how many frames?
I think it was 25 or 24 frames.
Really? Huh, wow.
I used the technique. It was modified camera though. It was a modified camera, and I used the technique that I explained in the presentation. And I mean, that's technically the results of that image. What was the last question? Filters. Depends on the camera. Most cameras accept clip-on filters. And I mean, they got clip-on filters technically for any camera. That's it.
Well, you said about removing, in order to get the H2 region, you had to remove stuff from inside the DSLR.
Well, then you're gonna have to, you know, break up your camera and remove that certain filter. I wouldn't do it. I would not recommend anyone to do it. There are certain companies, I would say.
Oh.
I think one of them was livepixel.com. You simply send your camera to them. They do the modification for you, and then they send it back. They do all the testing. They give you even warranty, and then they send you the camera back.
Oh, okay. So then it'd be a dedicated photography camera, pretty much.
If it's, again, it depends on you. I mean, you can do full frame, and you can use it in daylight. You can do IR imaging with a full frame camera. You can do hydrogen alpha modification, and you can still use that camera in daylight. Just do some, you know, color calibration within the camera. You can just white balance settings. You change your white balance, and that hydrogen alpha camera pictures can be used in daylight. Simple as that.
How much does it cost to get it modified?
It's been a long time, but I think it cost me like $200.
Okay. Thanks.
Welcome.
Any other questions?
Hi, Charlie. I wanted to know if that comprehensive list that he put together is available. He's got some wonderful software suggestions there that I would like to review again, the amateur that I am.
Yeah, some of the software that I mentioned in the presentation is actions. They're actions that you can use in Photoshop. They're just ready-made actions that, you know, when you open up an image, you just click it and it does all the processing for you, and then comes up with an enhanced image.
Well, that's why I mean, I'm basically lazy, so I would love to know where
I'm lazy too. I hate image processing.
right.
It's funny that I say that, but I hate image processing.
Yeah, it's tedious.
I got dated back from 2016. Every time I opened them, like, oh my God, another image processing now.
Can you send the links to the Lowbrow list?
It's in
that slide.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if you could email that slide.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Actually, is this lecture is going to be on the in the Lowbrow archives, right?
Yeah, on YouTube.
Okay.
It'll be
Okay,
there.
good. Thank you.
Sure. But with that said, for an image, I mean, as of now, for image processing and stacking, I mainly use PixInsight. That's a dedicated astrophotography software. It's expensive. I think last time I paid 300 something for it, but it's powerful. You can't imagine how powerful it is. Jeff does a great job with his emails. Every time he finds a good software, he sends an email about it. And most of them are paid softwares, but they're not very expensive. And each one of them, every year, I find a different software that does perfect, makes life much easier with the image processing. Now, the reason I love PixInsight is every time there is a paid software that comes out in the software in the market, PixInsight comes up with a free plugin that does exactly what that software does.
Okay.
And once you buy the software, all this plugin that comes out year after year is just free.
Yeah, I see Registax and AutoStacker out there that are have been freely available and used for years. You like them?
That's mainly for planetary imaging, not
right?
Sky imaging.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Which is your favorite focal length to use, or do you equally use all your different primes?
My favorite camera? Lens?
Oh, your favorite lens.
This thing, 135 millimeter Rokinon lens. I even had it on a permanent setup with a focuser, with a power supply, with a dew heater, everything. That's a Rokinon 135 lens. It's you can open it all the way to f2, and it's not that expensive. It's not like $1,000 lens.
Okay.
You can get it used on cloudy nights for like, I don't know, $250, $260. And the nice thing with this thing is it's sharp. Even at f2, stars are sharp edge to edge. What else do you want?
It's looking very lowbrowish there with rubber bands and stuff that I see.
Well, the rubber band is to the rubber band is to hold the focuser, but the whole thing is just 3D printed. The whole bracket is just 3D.
Ah, okay.
This is I don't know if I can open it. There you go. This is just an Arduino. This is just an Arduino board with a stepper motor controller.
Nice.
Hey, could you make plans for that available? That looks like a cool setup.
I could. I mean, I can make the STL files available,
Mhm.
but again, this is more like custom setup. But yeah, I mean, that's fine with me. I don't mind.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, to answer your question, 135 millimeter lens, my
Okay.
best image lens. Now that's for deep sky imaging for
Okay.
wide field of view.
Yeah.
Um, for wide field of view is this one. That's just a tripod, sturdy tripod with, that's a Canon 6D,
Mhm.
and that's a 14 millimeter Rokinon lens.
14 millimeter. Okay. Okay.
With a intervalometer external battery for the camera, so I can run it all night without worrying about, you know, running out of battery. And in front of the camera, I just put a dew heater, and that's it. That's what I did to capture my meteor shower image in the beginning of the presentation.
Ah, okay. Thanks again.
And it doesn't break your back. I mean, it's light. You can just put it in a bag and just drive anywhere.
Mhm.
Any other question?
I guess a comment coming from the photography world, daytime photography, nighttime photography tends to baffle a few folks because we're taught to use certain settings and everyone wants to keep ISO low to avoid noise. But in astrophotography or nightscaping, it's the exact opposite. And you know, you need to turn your gain up because it's dark. There's no sun to help you. You have to pull in the light from the stars. So, and Awni, this is kind of to warn you because this presentation will be awesome for the camera club that, and I don't know if Jim Forster, if you're out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this would be an excellent presentation if Awni does it. But one of the things he'll have to watch out for is it may surprise some people to see the ISO setting steady.
Well, data dropout is always interesting, entertaining.
Well, he is further away from us now.
Low ISO. But
Doppler effect.
you know, you're out here trying to
Doppler effect from warp drive.
collect starlight, and the Rokinon lens, a lot of expensive L lens. And Matt Lake Hudson.
Yeah, we were just commenting because you started.
Yeah, so
out there was
at
a
any
real
rate,
small one.
yeah, I was just before I pulled into the park.
The whole, I mean,
So I'm probably going to fade out again here in a bit. But no, excellent presentation. I've arrived. That's still up. Just beware, you'll get some interesting questions.
I don't mind.
I think he just entered the event horizon.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can still hear me. But, yeah, I'm here. I'll try and take an image.
Long story short,
I'm getting back.
anyone who have the passion, I would say, and the patience, very important, and have a camera, a fast lens can get any picture of what the pictures that I show can make the same thing. Back in 2015, I didn't even have a prime lens. I bought mine used for $100, and I was like, $100, that's gonna, probably the image gonna look horrible. And that's what I imaged the aurora with. So let me put it this way. Equipment is not your limit, it's yourself. It's believing in yourself. It's having the patience to do whatever you want. Now, it's always good to buy that top-notch equipment or top-notch camera or lens or whatever. Even better, makes life much easier for you. But you can still do it with basic setup. And the way to do it, again, you'll need patience. You'll need some enthusiasm. And you'll need that technique. You'll need to have that technique to get the image that will look decent at the end. The same technique that I explained, sensitivity and ISO and exposure and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I hope people get into astrophotography more. It's, again, each one might have a different reason. Mine is just, it's the challenge. It's just the passion about it. It's sharing the image with everyone else, especially with those who don't believe in space or doesn't believe in nebula or doesn't believe in, this is probably a NASA thing. No, it's not. I mean, anyone can do it as long as they have the passion to it.
Well, you mentioned the word luck there too, Awni, but we can see the passion and skill there too. Very good.
Yes, in Michigan. In Michigan,
Yes.
you're probably going to need the luck, with our weather. But
That's where the patience comes in.
Okay. Well, I'm quite impressed, Awni, not with just the presentation itself, but the fact that you were able to put that together so quickly. It is much appreciated, and we really did enjoy it. So how about a hand for Awni?
hope you like it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.